Larry Magid, CBS News and CNET. Do you remember the 2004 movie Mean Girls featuring Tina Fey and Lindsay Lohan?
And they have this book, this burn book, where they write mean things about all the girls in our grade.
What does it say about me?
You're not in it.
Well, it was based on a non-fiction book called Queen Bees and Wannabes by Rosalind Wiseman. That book, of course, was all about girls, but Rosalind Wiseman's new book, Masterminds and Wingmen, is all about boys. And because her book came out in 2013, the age of social media, it of course includes social media, gaming, and boys' use of technology. I spoke with Wiseman by phone, and the first thing I asked her was, Rosalind, you're famous for having written about girls, but as the new book illustrates, you do know a thing or two about boys as well, and in fact have two sons.
Well, I do. I do have a couple boys in my life who live in my house, but I've taught boys for a long time, and I've always been passionately wanting to help boys and to be advocates for them and to be able to make their lives better in the ways that I've always worked with girls. And I also knew that people were often very dismissive of boys' experiences and boys' lives and fell into stereotypes or described them in stereotypes that I don't think that we would in any way ever allow ourselves to talk about girls. So I wanted to be able to pull back the curtain on boys' lives, and I needed boys to help me. And that was the result was these two books.
Well, I was very pleased that you, for example, pointed out that just as we would never tolerate someone saying, you're a girl, you can't play baseball, somehow we do tolerate saying boys don't cry or boys shouldn't be able to wear certain kinds of outfits. Why is that still part of our culture? It's 2013, yet you still had to include that in your book.
Because I think that in many ways we are invested in boys looking like this masculine meaning and defining it as like always being in control, never being weak, never showing weakness. And I think that we have a really hard time asking ourselves the questions of what is the cost to boys. And I think that we often looked at boys, even for people who would define themselves as feminists, that we would look at boys and say, well, they have the gender power. Well, you know, when you look at a 14 or 12-year-old boy and he's really skinny and scrawny compared to a girl who's physically developed, it might be the case that she has significant gender, power struggles that she's going through as she walks down the street. But it doesn't look like that to a 12-year-old boy. It doesn't look like that to a 14-year-old boy. It looks like she has all the power. Now, I don't think we ever wanted to look at the complexities of those issues.
Well, the other thing is, you pointed out that we have this image that boys shouldn't be weak, but in ways that really matter in today's society, many young men are weak. If you look at college enrollment, if you look at who's in prison, if you look at situations which are really going to make you very powerless as an adult going forward, haven't boys slipped quite a bit over the last several years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're really having a crisis. I mean, look at what's happening today in the government. The majority of men who cannot work out their differences. I'm not saying that women always can work out their differences. I am not saying that. But what I am saying is that you've got men who are having a very difficult time compromising, and they're taking positions, and they don't want to be seen as weak. And they think that if they present themselves as strong and not negotiating and not compromising, that this will show that they are leaders. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff hurts us all. That's not what governing is. That's just inherently not, that's not what it is. And so as an educator, what's always been really important to me is to tie all of these issues back to the basis of like a civil contract that an individual feels and knows they have towards the community that they live in. And what does it mean to be in a democracy? Like, what does it mean to have roles and to have responsibilities towards other people? And also that healthy tension between, like, what are my rights and what are your rights? That kind of stuff is what boys need to be talking about, but we live in a culture that is constantly telling them that they have to assert their rights over everybody else. Or if they're up against somebody who does that, they have only two choices. One is they capitulate, they don't do anything, or they fight it with the same amount of power back or dominating power back.
By the way, in all fairness to my gender, I think it's fair to point out that there are women in politics who have bullied and who have been obstructionists, and I can think of two particular that come to mind, but there are others, some very famous women.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But I think one of the things that happened with Margaret Thatcher, for example, is that she was given really, all this stuff is so fascinating to me, but was given she's acting like a man. And so that was the way in which she sort of harnessed her power.
Yeah.
So it's such an interesting thing when you see women who are using the sort of traditional male way of getting power. So clearly, absolutely, women are able to do these kinds of things as well.
I was actually thinking of some American politicians, but I'm going to spare you the names because I'm not supposed to be political on this podcast. One of the things that you talked about in terms of boys is their opacity in terms of their emotions. We would like to think that as parents, we're in touch with our kids, that we have at least some sense as to how things are going. But your book implies that maybe we think the boys are all right, but perhaps they're not.
I think that boys are very reluctant to tell us what's going on with them as they get older, and older means like from 10 on. There's always a couple of boys that do feel comfortable sharing with their parents, but the overall group of boys, my experience as a teacher and also working with these boys to write these books for the last few years, is that they actively create walls to not share what's going on. And part of that is really developmentally appropriate. They're growing up and they want to have separate lives from their parents.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, and I'm convinced of this even more now that the book has come out, is that a lot of parenting experts, me included, spent a lot of time telling parents that they should talk to their children at the end of the day or picking them up from school or practice. The way to express love and interest in your child was to ask them all kinds of questions.
Yep.
And the boys don't see it as an expression of love and interest. They see it as interrogation. They see it as exhausting. And then what happens when the boys understandably shut down is that the parent sees this as being like, you are being difficult. You are being non-emotional. In fact, actually, it's completely opposite. The boys have such a strong emotional reaction to the constant barrage of questions that the only choice that they feel sort of in their bodies is to shut down.
Yet, as you point out, you and other parenting experts, and I, as you know, I've written extensively on these issues as well, are always advising, talk to your kids, open up to your kids. We're not telling people to lecture to their kids. We are, in fact, saying you should ask your kids what's going on. And I'm reluctant to stop giving that advice, but your book kind of opened me up to rethinking it. How do you get your kid to open up? There must be some way.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not like we don't need information from our children. We do, and we do need, and we're in relationship with these people, so we need to, it's a reciprocity, right? So what I'm saying is the way we're doing it is often counterproductive. So really that first moment of seeing them at the end of the day, I would just, just greet them and just relax and create an atmosphere where somebody wants to be with you. The other part is that, if you want to find out what's going on with your kid, when there's a window of time, usually between 9:30 and 10 at night, where things are calmer and you haven't fallen asleep yet and your kid maybe is in bed or just things are calmer. And it's even better if the lights are out. And sit, in your kid's room and sit at the foot of his bed and say to him, hey, just want to check in with you. Like, anything you think I should know? Anything important for you that's going on with you? And then don't expect some deep, 4-hour conversation. You just need your son to know that you see him, you care, and you're there if he wants to talk to you. Then boys are much more likely to come to us.
So you talk in your book in general about boys and all aspects of their lives, but clearly in 2013, online is very important, whether they're on Facebook, whether they're using their phone. Talk a little bit about boys and social media, boys and technology, in terms of how it's helping them and how it may be challenging them in ways that perhaps some of us haven't thought much about.
Well, I mean, I'm still getting the conversations from parents about when should I allow my children to have a Facebook page and when should they have a mobile phone. And I really, honestly, as a parent, as an educator, what is absolutely clear to me is the social norming that is going on with boys is not on Facebook, and it doesn't start at Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all that. It doesn't. It starts when they start doing things like Xbox Live. And as soon as they start to interact with people socially while they're playing a game, they are literally learning the social rules of how to conduct themselves when they're angry, when somebody else is angry, when somebody is being aggressive with somebody. That is when they're learning, like, what are you in your right to go after somebody because you want to get revenge because they made a mistake in the game. Or they're going to learn about people hacking into Call of Duty because it happens all the time. On one of the versions of Call of Duty, players are constantly hacked in the game. and then they're putting all sorts of profanity on the screen that your child is seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So, really, as soon as your kids are playing online gaming, that is where they're seeing the social rules. What's amazing to me is that parents seem to have very, very little idea about what's going on in those worlds, unless they're playing the games themselves, and they're not thinking that that's a problem, and that's a problem unto itself.
Parents are on Facebook, and I think at least have some clue about Instagram and Snapchat, but they're not playing games. I didn't play those games because they frankly don't interest me, and I don't have the time for them. Yet what you're saying is that that's a very important venue for very young children, as well as older kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that this generation, I know, like my husband plays with the boys, and, he grew up playing video games. And I think that this is going to be a real change as the generation, we have a parenting generation that's coming up that grew up playing video games that are very quickly, that will have grown up playing online video games. If you play these games, you do know what the wording, the words and the language and what the inappropriateness often and the toxic culture of some of these games can be. It doesn't have to be. I mean, one of the things I think, I'm sure somebody can disagree with me about this, but I think one of the reasons why some kids are going to Minecraft and playing Minecraft is because it socially seems to be a much less toxic culture than when you're playing games like Call of Duty or League of Legends or, Dota or all of those things. Those can be pretty toxic, nasty conversations that you're listening to.
And let me challenge you, if I may. I mean, there's been a lot of controversy over the whole issue about whether this toxicity really does infect the users or whether kids kind of just slough it off.
Yeah.
And some research suggesting that it has absolutely no impact on violence or personality. Others implying that maybe it is having a negative effect on our kids. What's your thoughts on that, and how can we kind of mitigate it, since kids are going to play those games, whether some parents like it or not?
Right, and my kids included. So I think that just like I would hope parents, whatever a survey said or an evaluation said about the impact of your child's language or his personality being around like nasty conversations. I think that as a parent, I don't want, and I would hope, and I think that many parents do not want their children to be constantly around other people who are using racial epithets, homophobic epithets, really disrespectful words against women, so racist, homophobic, sexist comments consistently around you to express your anger and frustration. I don't want my children to be doing that in their real life. I don't want them doing it on their online life. There is no difference anyway, and I don't want them surrounded by people who do that as well. And I don't like it for the purpose of it tears apart, I believe, the fabric of like what civil discourse looks like. And the other part is that these are all shorthand words like faggot or the N-word or things that are used so often as a shorthand way to put somebody down based on who they inherently are. That is what discrimination and bigotry is based on. So it can't stand. It can't be supported. I don't really care honestly, I don't really care what the evaluations say. As a parent, I have to take a stand against bigotry. And to me, that's the shorthand of what bigotry looks like today for our kids.
Well, it's interesting. When my son was in middle school, which was now, about 14 years ago or so, somebody called him gay. And he said, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't really mean what you think it means, Dad. And I said, well, I don't know, Will, because there are kids at your school who are gay, and that should be something that they have absolutely no negative feelings around. Yet by using the word gay as an insult, isn't that kind of not just perhaps demeaning to you, but more importantly, demeaning to kids who happen to be gay? And he just sloughed it off, just basically moved on. And I was kind of stymied as to how to approach that. I mean, I kind of kept my ground, but at the same time, he just kind of wrote it off as, that's what kids say.
Both of those things are true. I think boys, in the moment, it's unrealistic for any parent to think kid's going to say, when you say something like that, oh my gosh, Dad, you're completely right. I didn't see it like that. Now I get it. I think that if they're going to think that, they don't admit it. I think they'll come back later and say things like that. But I think they it's so normalized for them that understandably they slough it off. What's really important, I think, in those moments as a parent is to say, I get that it's so common that you don't see, it's like what everybody says, I get that. But just because it's common doesn't make it right. And what I stand for as your parent is that you are absolutely 100% clear that those words that are used to put somebody down just because of who they are absolutely 100% in opposition to what this family stands for.
And by the way, we had this conversation with my daughter when she was probably in middle school or high school, listening to Eminem, Matthew Mathers, who was using the B word. He used the B word to describe women. And I said, how would you feel if you used the N word to describe African Americans? And my daughter said, that's different. But interestingly enough, as you point out, years later, she came up to me and said, Dad, you were actually right. So maybe I got smarter over time.
Right.
Who knows?
No, they're just not going to give you, it's just too difficult to process the information and give you credit for it in the moment that it's happening.
So we're kind of running out of time. It's been a great conversation, but give me some other kind of high-level tips from your book or just observation from your book, just to kind of round things off.
As depressing and as really quite serious as the statistics are about boys, about their educational achievement right now, about their incarceration rates, about their mental health, the statistics can be really are very, very sobering. But what I am absolutely convinced about from going through this process of writing these books for boys, the one for parents and the one for the boys themselves, is that if we acknowledge how messy life is, and we acknowledge to the boys that they probably will have experiences in their future, or if they've not already have, where adults have acted hypocritically, where we are messy, where things are just difficult, and that the men in their lives say to the boys that being a confident, strong man is about acknowledging this messiness and asking for help and seeing it as a sign of strength instead of a sign of weakness, that our boys are going to meet us halfway. They're going to take the risk that we want them to take, which is to express their passion for things, about making the world a better place, for claiming the things that they're interested in. That's really passionate stuff. That's really important stuff that I really believe the boys are going to come forward if we meet them and see them where they are.
Well, as the parent of a now grown-up boy who turned out well so far, I want to thank you because you gave me some insight looking back. Rosalind Wiseman, the author of Masterminds and Wingman, her new book, and her old book or older book is still out there, I think still popular, Queen Bees and Wannabes. Thank you very much. And one last thing, people can buy your book in the usual places, but how else can they find you, online or on social media?
So it's all Rosalind Wiseman on Facebook, on Twitter, on my website. And if you want to download the guide for boys, the ebook that I wrote, just put my name in and put the guide, and it'll come up on Amazon or iTunes, and it's easy to find.
Well, thanks a lot. My son wasn't born with a user manual, but now we have at least a cheat sheet.
Thank you.
Rosalind Wiseman, thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry.